Okay, so we're going to go over the FileWave best practices. It's more like for, you know, server side caring for your server. Like the angle of this is really like taking care of your FileWave server, essentially. So, okay. So the first thing, right, when you think about, taking care of the FileWave server is like firewall ports. Now, whether you're hosted or on premise, firewall ports can matter and proxy ports can matter. Well, I say proxy ports. A proxy interfering with traffic can matter. Um, so you want to think about, can your clients from your network or networks, can your clients from like the corporate Wi-Fi, can your clients from their homes get to the FileWave server? So whatever things you might have in place, like I used to use semantic endpoint protection on all my endpoints, Mac and Windows. And I think at some point they added firewall. If I remember right, they added firewall management to it. But, if you're managing inbound and outbound traffic on your Mac and Windows systems, or if you think about like iPads that might be going through a proxy or something, you're going to want to think about the ports. And we do change things about ports sometimes from version to version. So in 15.4, we got rid of some insecure ports. And I'll explain what that is. And in 15.5, if you do Windows imaging, there's a new IVS port. So I want to just show. The article and show what I mean. So on the port article, you'll see that 20,015 is marked in red and says that it was going away. You'll see 20,013 is going away. There was before 15.4, when clients would talk to the server or boosters would talk to the server, clients would talk to boosters, there was an insecure, like a non-SSL port that they would initially talk on. And then they would bump up to the secure port. So we eliminated that and just use the secure port now. There's no reason for the insecure port. But the side effect can be confusion because you might go to, for instance, the custom client builder, and you might look at ports and you might see, oh, 20,015 and say, well, that port is gone, right? So maybe I'm supposed to make this 20,016, but that's not the case. This is only confusing because we have coded into the client that you leave it with the ports as we've documented them. And I mentioned this in some of the KB articles, but if you see a KB article that is unclear, put a comment on it. If they connect to if they try to use 20,015, they will really go on 20,016. Same is true for booster ports where, so when I put something in here, you'll see 20,013, but oh, the article says that's gone. You still use the port as documented. And we're going to try and make this less confusing, but it is a little bit confusing. I think we could make it less confusing by actually saying to use the ports that you're supposed to use. But this is a recent change, so just something to think about. So it's not like the secure port is a new port, so you probably already have it open. It's more just knowing that your server is no longer listening on that insecure port. Um, and you could see the same thing, over here with IVS, FileWave imaging, except one other change in 15.5 was, so when you would image a Windows system and it would boot up, it would connect to an NFS share, network file share, and it would do it on 2049. So that NFS volume was completely in the open. So it was inside your network, but anybody inside your network could browse your images. Is that a security issue? For most people, it's probably not because those images are present on all your machines. But if a stranger was on your network and they discovered the NFS server, they could get a copy of, your image as it gets set up. Maybe there's something on there you don't want them to see. Um, as well, if you were to do an image capture. So let's say I capture the CIO's computer, to the IVS. Well, there's probably sensitive data on there. So a change that we made was that we're using this 2049 with a 0 on the end. Um, and that is actually the new port, and it is using S-tunnel. So what happens when the Windows machine boots up is it makes a secure VPN connection to the IVS, and then the IVS takes the traffic from here on the IVS over to the NFS volume. So everything is protected, and no longer would there be somebody poking around your network getting access to data. So that is a security improvement. Um, it's not a perfect improvement because obviously when something boots up, it has to get its encryption key, and the way that it gets that, there's theoretically a way to attack that, but it would be extremely difficult. And so, we're going to continue to think about ways to protect it that are, hopefully mostly impenetrable. You would hope, but yeah, so NFS got to change too. But otherwise, in the past couple of versions, there really hasn't been much change. There was a lot of change like a year ago and 2 years ago, but we've gotten pretty stable. And if anything, we may be stripping away ports, because we don't need the insecure ports. We can reduce and consolidate. And so the least amount of ports that we have, the better, right? Okay, so I wanted to talk about that. And so then, I wanted to talk about the differences between, hosted and on-premise. So, uh, and I saw that we had somebody join. So, CB, if you want to be able to talk or ask questions, I'm going to watch the chat, and I'm recording this for YouTube. So, um, and you can click the little raise hand if you want to be able to talk. That is totally fine. Okay. Um, okay, so the differences between hosted and on-premise. So I'll just run through this quick. I don't know, CB, if you're hosted. I know Sean is, but we'll just talk about the differences. So aside from the pros and cons, comparing virtual machines to physical machines. Oh, so you're both hosted. So um, I'll just run through this for the purposes of the recording. Um, but when we host it, right? So first there's a virtual machine on premise, then there's a physical machine. Everyone could agree physical machines where there's dedicated resources and you want to add more RAM, you have to put another stick of RAM in. I think everyone can agree these days a physical host is not usually desirable. We do have some customers that run FileWave on a Mac where they'll use a Mac that was spare. And in that scenario, I can see where they do it. But for the most part, you either want a VM which is on premise or you want to be hosted. And being hosted, of course, we set it up, we patch it, we back it up, we have more access to it for development when there's an issue. We can monitor for attacks. We can do a lot to try and protect you, and we have hundreds of customers on hosted now, and hosting is getting better and better. I would say 3 years ago it was very much at the beginning stages, and maybe last year it got a bump up in improvements, and I think now it's probably in a pretty good state in November 2024. So, um, and that's just because we had to work on our processes. Like we just got ISO 27001 certification. Some of that certification was around how we take care of customer data and how we handle disasters. And so we've worked out a lot of things. You might still have like an issue with your server, um, but hopefully it would be at this point the same kind of issue you might encounter on-prem, I think. So let me just move on to this. So This won't be important for the folks who are hosted necessarily. Well, part of it won't be. So the first thing is like when you think about your FileWave server, right? What version of Debian or Mac OS are you on? And the root password. So by being hosted, that's taken care of. But you still have on-premise boosters and IVS, the clients themselves. Um, so a lot of people do miss upgrading, I guess, the on-premise components. And a lot of on-premise people skip server upgrades too. They don't necessarily do them right away. But I would say that it is the easiest for development to troubleshoot and you get the best features. I mean, it's ideal when you're on the latest version, because it's fresh in the mind of the developers and we find solutions to problems easier. Um, but if you are either hosted or on-premise, there is an article. So there's this, your server has been upgraded, right, for hosted people. And this list is a checklist of things to do, right, that you want to upgrade, FileWave Central, the admin. You want to upgrade boosters. You want to probably upgrade IVS. You want to upgrade the clients. One thing about client upgrades on Windows specifically is with 15.5, no longer will you have a problem if you have admin, booster, or client like all on the same machine. Before, when you would upgrade the client, you might break the admin, or you upgrade the admin, you break the client. That is completely fixed in 15.5 because we used to use one library across them all. So when one would upgrade it would break the others because now the library was updated, but it wasn't it wasn't the version that the part that wasn't updated needed. So client upgrades and then admin's broken because you didn't upgrade it yet. But that is fixed. Also, in 15.5, on the Windows side, everything's 64-bit now. Should see better performance from what I've seen. On Mac OS, everything should be native, should not depend on Rosetta from what I've seen. So that is a good change because it just keeps us moving forward. The less compatibility layers you need, the better you're going to see on performance and the less chance of a problem because of that compatibility layer. Okay. So you're going to want to go through that list because that checklist. There's another article for upgrading your on-prem server. It talks through the same thing. And in fact, when we send out the email to hosted customers, it includes a link to that server upgrade checklist. So you should see that whenever hosting operations emails out about upgrades. If you're on premise, you want to make sure you're backing up your server, right? So that you're perhaps using the backup script that's in our knowledge base. So if you were to go here, there is a script that handles backups and makes it really easy for on-premise. You don't have, or for hosted, you don't have to worry about that because IT handles that, and so you'd be good. And you may notice when I search the KB, I do it up here just because I know the certain word to look for. But if you've never used it, this little AI search thing is really good for if you're not quite sure the right words to search for. And it's getting better and better. So it's a good thing for conceptually if you want to ask a question and you don't know the right words to use. Okay. I guess another point on here that I didn't talk about is, okay, so for if you were running Debian or Mac OS and you were on-prem, or if you think about your boosters or your IVS, you're going to want to make sure the OS is upgraded. I don't think I said that, but it is super important that you upgrade the OS. And I actually made a change for the upgrade script for Debian. This will be for on-premise. On-premise Debian boosters, on-premise Debian IVS, if you were to look at the download page, you'll see a change. And if I go here, so if I go to the Debian section, you're going to see where the upgrade process was multiple lines that you would copy and paste. Now it's this single line. And in fact, I would say for boosters, if they're Debian, you should just use the auto upgrade process. It's built into FileWave Central, but this is here anyway. Nice thing about this command is that it takes care of the operating system updates at the same time. It reboots the server at the end, or the IVS, or the booster, and it just does everything with a simple command line. And the way I wrote this, the same command line will work for different versions. So this will be much easier for me from version to version as we upgrade. But it's pretty simple and easy. And this will take care of the OS for Debian. Okay, so this last point, this affects hosted and on-prem. So think about your file sets and whether you're using them and if you should do any cleanup, because, you know, I've seen a lot of environments where file sets just get created, and never purged out, even when they're not used. And I sat with a customer that Em and I visited, and they had a case where there were a lot of file sets where they couldn't even remember why they originally made the file sets. And file sets do have, when you make them, so if I was to show, right, so if I make a new file set, I'll make an empty file set. They do have like a comment field you can use if you need to put notes. You know, that is one thing you can do if you need to remind yourself like why you're making a particular file set. And you should definitely organize things, you know, like how I have it organized now. I did it by platform and kind of category of thing. If you were a school, then you might have like elementary, middle, high school. You might have special education. If you were like a media company, like I worked at Time Warner in the past, you know, we might have the different magazine divisions like Sports Illustrated, Money, People. And within those, we might have edit and then publication. Edit and pub. Sorry. I didn't mean publication. What was pubbing? So the business side and the edit side. It's been too long, but I might break it down like that. I might also break it down. We used to also break things down sometimes by remote offices. So in our world, the New York office was the main like place, all right? But we had an office in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles office was like Business 2.0 was a publication, but there were also some people randomly there for other publications. So I tended to I treated LA like its own thing, which was a physical location, which was different from the way I treated New York, where I broke it entirely up by publication. So you want to think about physically where people are, departmentally where people are. How does your organization break things up? Because if you organize things right, then cleanup is really easy. You know, because imagine that I have like a Sports Illustrated group, and then I have an edit group, and then within there I maybe have like Super Bowl file sets, stuff related to making the Super Bowl editions of the magazine. Then I'll know really easily what that was. So name things right, group them right, and clean up, because you don't want this to grow and grow and grow, because you know, you'll gobble up server space, which I guess for hosted doesn't matter as much for you, except that there is a cap. If you hit the limit, you have to put in a ticket asking for more space. But for on-premise, you may have to assign more disk to the server. That's not great. If you have boosters, boosters will copy any file set that's been requested, and it will keep it until that file set is deleted from the server. So if I make a file set today, assign it to some devices, it goes to my boosters, and I leave it there for 10 years, if I don't delete it, it's never going to clear out from the boosters. So it's just wasting space on your boosters. So there's that. And it's just another thing for the server to track. So cleaning up, purging unused file sets, and especially Windows images if you do Windows imaging with FileWave. Windows images can be like 80 gigs in size. So definitely think about those.
Josh,
Yeah.
for hosted environments, when we look at the dashboard, specifically on the server performance status, is that information generally accurate in terms of trying to determine the performance of the server
That is a good question
generally?
because so I kind of know the answer to that. So there is a weird thing. So my server, this one that we're looking at, is in Amazon, but it's not in our hosted cloud. I kind of run this outside of it so I can do all sorts of bad things to it. But in my case, it reflects the actual amount of RAM that was on mine. I believe for hosted that you'll see things like the amount of RAM that the host has, not necessarily what's exposed to the container itself. So for hosted people, there is some of this that won't be 100% reflective. I think there's it's not so much here, but in the Grafana dashboard, there's like some CPU charts and things, and I don't feel like those are 100% useful for a hosted customer. We have a system that looks at performance. We have a thing, I believe it's in Datadog that can show it. And for instance, Emma and Andrew in professional services can access it. So and I think support can, or they can ask cloud to look at it. So if you're hosted and you think that maybe something doesn't look right or it's acting slow, they could look at if your server was maxing out on CPU or RAM and make adjustments to it. Um, in a perfect world, these things would be completely accurate to hosted, but I think today they're not because these were designed on the idea of a single VM or a dedicated machine. And instead, what we're doing is we're doing Docker containers. And so the metrics just aren't 100% good. The drive space one should be 100% true. So if you see the drive space one running out, this is the one you'll care about. And if it feels like your server is not responsive enough, that's where you could open a support case and see. But in a perfect world, we're monitoring that and we're making adjustments for it, hopefully before you would notice it. But I know that that's not 100% the case today. So you could notice a performance issue and report it to us, and then we could discover it uh, after because we're collecting more and more metrics, and so it's going to take us time to get that perfect. You know.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then, about that dashboard, because that was kind of the next slide, was about setting up alerts. And I know, Sean, that you use these alerts because it was a subject of one of our tickets. But this dashboard can be helpful, to get email alerts about certain things. So you hit alert settings. You can choose the things that you want. So you can see this goes to my personal account. And, I can put a subject here like FileWave server alert. And if you have multiple servers, then you may want to put in the subject, what server. I mean, that could be helpful. The signature thing is also a way like alert about FW Josh Lab or something. You can put, support contact. So like maybe if this alert was going to whoops, like to the operations people who aren't necessarily the FileWave admins, then this alert would say what server it's about. It would say who to contact. Like if I was back at Time Warner, we had a knock that was 24 hours a day. They would get an alert from a system like this and they would have no idea what to do with it unless they went and looked at they had like rule books about things. But if I put something like this in, it makes it so much easier for them to know who to contact about the thing, and what server generated it. But you can get alerts like, again, I don't know that CPU load is going to be true for hosted today. Um, Most of these other things, free RAM, I would say also not the case, but most of these other things are true for hosted. I mean, if you think about it, so if you use Apple Classroom, the SSL certificate, if you use FileWave.net, you don't really have to check that because the way that we renew it, it would probably trigger almost every month, because we do an automated thing, um, to renew it. Dep accounts, you probably do want to know if you do Apple devices. Android EMM, if you do Android, like a Pixel phone or a Samsung phone. LDAP extraction is if you're connected to an LDAP server, which you can be for hosted or on-prem. You can use LDAP for information. Um, Disk space, I believe, would be a valid one. You could actually try that out, but I believe that this would be true and helpful for a hosted or an on-prem. Um, Client distribution, I've never used that one for, um, I've never used that one. Classroom certificates, this one can be helpful because Apple Classroom certificates expire. And so you'd know if you were using Apple Classroom. There's booster info. Firebase Cloud Messaging we should probably get rid of because we don't need to set up a Firebase project officially anymore. That was a recent change. So I don't think you need that one anymore. But, also you could set it up regardless, and then when you get the first message about it, you'll see that you maybe did need it. But that one I'm unsure about because in 15.4 we made some changes to not need Firebase for Chrome, and a long time ago we made changes that you didn't need Firebase for Android. So that's why I say that that might not be needed anymore. And then licensing, APN so the Apple push notification certificate can be super helpful. VPP tokens, that it's expiring, it's not syncing, can be helpful. Email settings, I've honestly, in the 4 years I've been here, I've never really thought about why there's a checkbox about this, because the only way I'd get the email is if email settings was working. So I'm not 100% sure on why you would check this. Be honest about that. I should probably look into that, and then I can update my next best practices to include that, because it feels like a chicken and egg situation. Can't get alerted about it if your email settings aren't correct. And then email sent, which is related. This one I can see because there are things that will send emails, so it could alert you that it sent an email. Perhaps things like scheduled reports. And I don't know if you guys have seen that we have this, but a lot of people don't realize we have scheduled reports. So I can send this to me. And I can say that every day, and maybe not on the weekend, just the work days, I'm going to do a query, and I'm going to select a query, and I'm going to send maybe the battery report that I have. So if I do that and I hit OK, this will now, the server will generate an email and send a CSV file to me every weekday, skipping the weekends. And this can be super helpful if you had a query that had useful information to like a security department, or like a facilities person or something, where you wanted them to get the report. You don't really want them in FileWave necessarily, but you want to get them the data from FileWave, or somebody that maybe isn't really like an IT person, but they're working with the data, and they might even have access to FileWave, but they don't really feel comfortable in FileWave. This could just email the report each day, each month. Um, and so it's an easy way to get that data to a person. You can even do something fancy and send it to like a service account where that service account is looking for file attachments and then does something with that file attachment. It can be one way to automate certain things. Like I could imagine maybe if I had like Aruba wireless and I want to get all the MAC addresses into my Aruba system to allow them, then maybe I could be emailing a query to a mailbox and then it gets processed, something like that. But this alert and that scheduled report will only work if I set up the email stuff. So if I go to preferences and I go to mail, this has to be set up correctly. And I will tell you, we just recently had a big issue with our hosted environment. So I'll bring it up that Microsoft reported an attack, a brute force attack from FileWave servers. And the reason they thought that was we had enough customers who use Microsoft 365, Office 365, who had set up an email to send through, and then the password must have changed, or the account info changed in such a way that it was no longer able to send, but the FileWave server just keeps on trying. And then you might imagine if we have 20 FileWave servers that keep on trying bad credentials, it's going to look to Microsoft like we're attacking them. And Amazon reported to us that there was this attack, and then we figured out that it was just that some customers had bad credentials here. So we have tickets open for development to make a change that if this fails a couple of times, it should probably have a little disabled checkbox that gets enabled, and then it should probably show on the dashboard, like some visual indicator like mail is failing to send. You need to fix it, and then we should stop because then we won't get flagged as a spammer. And plus, you might believe that this is able to email you because you didn't change it, but you forgot that. So in our case, on our server that manages employee devices, we didn't realize that somebody that used to be in IT here had used their own email address as the sending address. And so they're not here anymore for a while, and we weren't getting emails. Well, we had his email account as the sending account. So we were guilty of it too. I would say use a service account for this, something that is dedicated to sending stuff from your FileWave server. So that way you know that the password never changes. It's super long password. Um, and I say password never changes, but ideally even a service account, you should cycle the passwords every 6 months or every year, whatever you can manage, because there's still value in changing the password, but you'll know that you're changing the FileWave password, and so you'll come in to update it. Okay, and so this can be super helpful. Let's see, I don't want to save that because I don't want to get those changes. Good. But think about this notification thing because it is helpful. It can be visibility into things with your hosted server, definitely with your on-prem, to let people know. And I mentioned about the service account, about staffing changes. Um, if you use G Suite, you need to make an app password. In fact, even for Microsoft Office 365, if you do two-factor, you have to make an app password so that you can get around needing two-factor. I know that Google and Microsoft and others are moving away from the ability to use static passwords. They want to do things like certificates to be able to send. So we have a ticket open about that. So we want to address that so that folks could keep using this. Although I proposed a different solution that instead of needing a SMTP server, that we would have our own mail server that would actually send out the email so that you could know it's coming from a FileWave server. You could whitelist it. We could be the sender. We could handle spam and stuff from it. or I should say we could control whether spam comes from it. We could make sure we know what FileWave server is sending the messages. So that might be something that we do, but for now we want to make it so if this was sort of brute force trying to log in, it should disable itself. So that hopefully should come in a future version. And then there is another dashboard, the Grafana dashboard, right? So we in 14.9 we did some overhaul of Grafana, and actually we've continued to do updates. In 15.5 we just did another update to Grafana to get some more improvements. If you haven't looked at it, the Grafana dashboard, you go to the web admin, FileWave Anywhere, and it's the dashboard there. This is where I say like there's these CPU and file system fullness and memory. So the memory and CPU, I don't know for hosted that they're 100% spot on, because the container can see the host that it's on, and there's many containers on a single host. But we should have that all figured out, hopefully, by the time we release version 16, because in version 16 in January, we're going to replace the old dashboard with just using Grafana, even in FileWave Central. We're going to move to one dashboard that hopefully has all the same functionality. That's the hope. I haven't seen a demo yet, but it should be all the same functionality, but just being Grafana. So we're not maintaining two separate dashboards because that feels silly. We have this powerful dashboard engine, and we only make it really obvious how to get to it from anywhere. So that's going to change. Okay, so now just some like things that do affect hosted if you use your own domain name. So like if my server is, filewave.joshi.com, well, I have to manage the certificate. You're going to want to take care of this unless you're a filewave.net. Filewave.net we should be taking care of. Hopefully that should never expire. And yeah, so when you look at it, you'll probably see a date that is coming up because we renew it kind of in a let's encrypt kind of way where it renews pretty often. And I think we have multiple ways we renew. So like, don't be so worried if you see it expiring in the next like 4 weeks because the script is probably going to run and then you'll see it'll expire in 16 weeks from now. But if you take care of your cert, you have to make sure to upload this, put this on your calendar, your expiration date, and handle it ahead of the expiration date so that you're not cut off, that your clients won't be able to connect to your server if your SSL cert expires. Compatibility mode is gone from FileWave. I still have this on here because not everybody's on. I believe 15.4 was where we got rid of that. And that's where those insecure ports went away. So if you're running less than 15.4, you may have compatibility mode turned on your server. Compatibility mode is less secure and doesn't use certificates to authenticate the clients. So if you are on an older version, you probably want to get to 15.4 or 15.5. And then compatibility mode will be gone, but before you upgrade, if you are on an old one and you do have it checked that it's enabled, you probably want to work with support and figure out why. Why do you have it checked? Some people have it checked from troubleshooting years ago. They never turned it back off. But you should check if it is checked. If it's not checked, then you're fine. Just upgrade to the latest. Then there's the Apple push notification. And both of these dialogues, the previous one and this one, they're in preferences when you are in FileWave Central. And it's just the different tabs of preferences. So the push notification, if you manage Apple devices, this expires every year. And if it expires, then your Apple devices are not going to talk to your server. So you need to renew it. We had a issue that people would run into where they would renew it incorrectly. Like, it's very important to renew the same certificate every year because if it changes, your Apple devices will be cut off until you get a renewed version of the original certificate. So we put something in 15.4 so that if the certificate doesn't match, we give you a warning because um, to protect you. Like it'll say, hey, this doesn't match, and you probably shouldn't replace this, or you could cut off communication. So we have a safety in now for that. But where people get stuck here is, let's say I set up FileWave today, right? And I work at the widget company and we set it up and I use my personal Apple account to create the certificate. That would be a really bad thing. If I ever left the widget company, well, they wouldn't have access to the original certificate because it lives in my Apple ID. Um, so anyone setting up new Apple management, make sure to use an ID that you control. If you make an account that's, at thewidgetcompany.com, an ID that will stay. So it's very important and to remember where that account was. So I would create an annual calendar event to renew it, and I would note what the Apple ID is that you used. Let's see. Then the other part of that is if you're doing Apple management, there is, so if you do the device enrollment program or automated device enrollment, whichever you call it, um, when a Mac comes into FileWave, there is a client that is pushed to it. And a lot of people forget to go here to mobile, Mac OS, and update the client. And you make this client on the custom.filewave.com site. So if I go, so, that was this custom.filewave.com where you make the client, you make it, the same way that you've made prior ones. Um, and you just build it and then upload it into your admin. So if I go, I'll bring this up, right? And it'll say, 15.3.1. So here, my lab server is guilty of this. So in this case, what would happen? Let's say I have a new Sequoia machine and it's going to come into FileWave. I'm going to, roll it through dep. Well, the 15.3.1 client's going to push to it. And that may not work out perfectly, right? Because it didn't know about Sequoia. It doesn't maybe know about some new things that are in Sequoia. So I would want to update this. And in fact, I could update this just to show how it would be done. So 15.5.0, this is support 2.filewave.net, and then current password. Well, I don't really use this for anything. This password, you want to think about it. You want it to just be unique. It's used for remotely changing client preferences. It used to be used for the VNC remote desktop connection. In version 16, this password goes away. It's not needed. It's not useful. So come January, this password won't matter. Um, I'm going to track my devices. I'm not going to overwrite the configuration. Remote control enabled. Prompting. I don't need a certificate because I use a full certificate. If you have a self-signed cert, then you may want to attach that, or you would want to attach that. I'm not going to mess with these ports. I did not customize anything about my installation. I'm going to use all the default ones, including the Insecure 20015, because it will automatically handle that. I don't care about the VNC port. We just don't use that port anymore. I just leave it as it is. I'm not going to have a booster. I just have to fix that because I typed in some garbage before. So this is the way that I would want it. So I'm going to build. We don't need to save anything. And then it's going to give me a zip file. And I'm going to unpack the zip file, and then I'm just going to pick it on the preferences there. I don't know. Is this something that either of you have ever forgotten to do if you manage Apple stuff? Or Macs specifically?
Say again, Josh?
Have you ever forgotten to, you manage Macs, right?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever forgotten to keep this up to date, this guy?
Um, only probably about one or two times. It would just be a delay of several days when I realized that the new devices are coming up with an old version,
Yeah,
old
it's
client version.
I don't like that this is not super exposed. Like I could go to a new version and not even think about that this, version isn't updated. Um, the other thing is if I leave this dialog right now, it won't actually have updated. You want to wait till it says this. Once it says this, then you're good. Um, Windows is the same sort of thing for Windows MDM, but only if you do Windows MDM, not just managing Windows devices, but Windows MDM where Azure is tied to FileWave, then you want to make sure to update this too. But we don't expose this so well, and we've been talking about doing something to more automatically update this because, of course, if you update your server, you you want to either know that this needs an update or have it just done. Maybe it would be a button or something, but you shouldn't have to go to that custom.filewave site. Feels like an extra thing that you shouldn't have to do. So you want to think about that and keep that up to date. And the same thing for Windows. I said Windows MDM. And then another housekeeping thing is if you do Apple stuff, volume purchase program and device enrollment program, these also have expirations, and you generally it's once a year, and you'll want to update the tokens. You'll want to make sure you have access to um, like your Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager account and be able to update that. Otherwise, it should show. So the way to know something's wrong is one, the dashboard will say that it failed to sync. But if I go here, if you do synchronize, well, it'll say it couldn't sync. It'll say that the last successful sync was in the past. So it should be kind of obvious when it's broken. I want to show a little trick here. If if your volume purchase program, if your licenses don't seem correct, so like I don't know, somehow some glitch in the number of licenses came in. If I hold the Option key on my Mac, should work on Windows too. You can see synchronize becomes full sync. So it's a little cheat if you ever want to do a full sync of all your licenses in, if you think something, or even your machines. See synchronize full sync so that all the DEP stuff syncs in. It's a little cheat if things become out of sync with Apple. Okay. Then there is things about performance. So there are ways that you can hurt your server. So this screen, I'll just go to it to speak to it. So in preferences, if I go to inventory, you can see mine set to 10 minutes, which is the default. Well, what would happen if I drop this to 5? And 5 is the lowest I can do. If I have a very big server, that means every 5 minutes the smart groups are going to get refreshed. So what happens with smart groups in the clients area is they don't like constantly get updated. They get updated on an interval. And when this interval is hit, the server kind of locks everything. It figures out all the smart groups, and then it unlocks everything. So by having this be a very low number, and even 10 could be low depending on the size of server you have. By doing that, you could see that your server is overly busy because every time it's locked to process it, if you have, imagine you have 40,000 clients, you have like 1,000 smart groups, and then every 5 minutes it's processing those. There could be a case where at the end of it processing it, it starts processing again, and your server becomes like unusable. There's other people that say, like if I know my server becomes unusable for, some amount of time when this refresh hits, maybe I don't care. I'm not a busy environment. Maybe it's fine if it's every 30 minutes. the smart groups might be used to assign content. So where you want to think about this is if technicians or yourself would change a custom field that would cause a machine to go into a smart group to get a piece of software, if it would be bad that it could take up to 30 minutes for that to occur, then you wouldn't want to make this be 30 minutes. But if your environment kind of just flows and, it's totally fine if it takes 30 minutes for a change to be reflected, it's a little bit more of a lazy environment for changes, where it's totally okay and nobody's like sitting there waiting on things. Um, Being 30 minutes is nicer to the server. It's less often, right? So less busy. So it's just something to think about. And that is, I suppose, the big thing about this with performance, that the number of smart groups um, will affect how long it takes to work through this. So. And then queries, which is sort of another part of this that can hurt your admin, but also yeah, I'll show it. So I have good examples here. So I have inventory queries. You can see the sample ones. I have a few here that are showing, but then I have many more that are not showing. So what is the difference between it showing and not showing? So if I check all windows, well, you can see, okay, that makes it show. But does it do more than that? And the answer is yes. So everything that is showing or selected gets processed when you open your FileWave admin and on an interval. It's every like 5 minutes or so. So you'll see, if we sat here looking at it, if I enrolled a new device, then the number of all windows might go to 4. Things will change. Um, this can be a performance impact to your admin. It can technically be a performance impact to the server. If you have queries, like let's say I'm working on a query and I have a query that would make like 6 million results. I don't really have it worked out. It's a little bit screwy. If I check the box to make it show up over here and I see that 6 million number, well, that means that query is going to take a long time to process. And one of the side effects of having really big or not so great queries is when you open your admin, you'll see that inventory queries will look blank, even though there are queries. And then after some amount of time, suddenly they will appear. And that is a real indicator that you have queries that are just consuming resources. And you may want to think about it. And you can work with support. In fact, there's a command line that can be run on the server. So for hosted, obviously support can run that. That actually measures how much time it takes for each query to run. So they can produce that and tell you exactly which query is taking, minutes to run versus seconds or less than seconds. So if I think about my queries, I want queries over here where I'm kind of watching over it. Like maybe I'm starting to deploy Sequoia, and I really need to have an idea of how much Sequoia is out there. So I might want this here because it's a simple query and it's going to, just increase, as the number of deployments increase. Um, if I want to, I guess for anything that you're continuously monitoring, because anything else, like let's say I want to know how much Windows 11, but I don't constantly need to know it. I can just double click on it and it opens in a tab. And with this tab open, this is running periodically while my admin's open, but I can close it, and so that's how you can control what's getting processed on that interval. So the things over on the left are always running, and the things that are open are running as well. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
No, that made sense.
Yeah. I wish in the UI it would be exposed a little better. It's something over time maybe we'll get better at. Like even if it was just some text, like selected items will be running, regularly or something. Uh, oh, and by the way, something that you may not have ever noticed is there's this refresh samples button. Let's say I let's say I deleted this, the Windows 8 one. I deleted Windows 10. And that was a mistake, right? I really wanted that, some of these samples. They were really good. I don't really know how they were. Well, there's this refresh samples that basically brings them all back. So boom, they come back in. They default to on, which is not so perfect, but refresh samples can bring them back. If you've ever wondered, or if you wanted to see if there were, like, I suppose, new samples, because I don't think we really manipulate them once we've created them. So this refresh samples will affect the sample queries section. Okay, so I talked about queries. One other aspect about the busyness, like I said, smart groups affect the server. Queries, they really mostly affect your admin, but they do to some extent affect the server. Um, a thing about queries versus smart groups. The client's area is not really a reporting area, and it's not intuitive that that's the case. So this feels an awful lot like it's a reporting area because I can put columns, I can use it for a report, but it is actually not meant to be a reporting area. It's meant to be a way to group devices for the purposes of distributing content. So it's meant for, okay, all my Windows devices get TeamViewer for Windows, so I'm distributing content to that. It's that queries are meant for reports. So the way everything was designed with performance and use, that's, I guess, part of the design, that if you approach it that way, that everything I want to report on is a query, and all my client content is the smart groups, then you're going to build things in the way the developers basically envisioned, which is always going to be the least stressful way to create things, hopefully. But that is, these two concepts are meant for two different purposes. It's just over time they started adding things like being able to add any of these columns, and I think that really confuses things for people, because it feels an awful lot like a report.
By the same token, I mean, you said earlier that hosted environments, or there is a command line that can be used to determine what queries are busy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a similar command line to see what smart groups might be taking up too much time?
I believe there is. I know at least development can look into it. But I think there is a command now that tells you the timing of, but it's server side, right? So you could reach out to support and say, so how would you know? I suppose it would be a symptom. Let's say I had a lot of smart groups and they were making my server busy a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
I would probably end up opening a support ticket, not about the smart groups, but about, like, my server not acting right. And then part of the server not acting right would be hopefully that support would realize, oh, it's really busy processing smart groups. And then the next step would be, well, which smart groups are causing this? Um, so there are ways you can make, really, I'll say, maybe bad smart groups. I don't know, like, an example of a smart group that used to be terrible is, imagine that you make a smart group to list all the devices that have checked in the last 5 minutes. Well, that's going to create and destroy, like, what's in that list every time smart groups refresh, right? Because 5 minutes has passed, there's a few more devices, there's one device that gets removed. Now the next time 10 devices get removed from that list. So you almost never want to make smart groups that are based on them being online today, them being online in the past 30 days. Things like that are more like a report. So that that I would do. The one case where I do see people make maybe a dynamic thing based on no, I wouldn't do time-based things in smart groups where it can change a lot. And also I would think about if I have lots of smart groups that do the same exact thing, and is there really a reason to have two different smart groups or multiple smart groups that do the same exact thing? It's the same list of machines, but I've called one smart group is, Windows Defender, and the next smart group is called Windows Software Updates. Is there a reason? There could be a reason, but is there a reason that I have two smart groups that are basically all my Windows machines um, that are used for two different things? Um, but maybe I really just should have one. Um, and you take that idea and you multiply it because probably in your real environment you have many, many smart groups. So think about, if you have duplication for any reason, you can make your server a lot happier if you deduplicate what you're doing. you know
Gotcha. Thank you.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
And let's see, so we talked about that. Boosters is relevant to hosted, especially um, because your server is in the Amazon cloud. If you have, well, for one thing, for hosted we say everybody needs a booster, but practically, like, what's one reason why you need a booster is if I have a school or workplace with people in, let's say I have an in-person office, um, I want a booster so that I'm not dragging all the file sets through my internet gateway, right? Because I could be filling up my pipe to the internet, and the booster can help eliminate that traffic. Why do I want a booster if all my workforce is remote, right? Because I don't have an office that I'm protecting. For hosted, it's really to protect the FileWave server for one, because now let's say I have 1,000 clients. And that 1,000 clients, they could either go to the FileWave server directly, which can make it busier, or they can go to a booster that then funnels the traffic. You can see a great performance increase by that. We also have some costs. We're trying to keep hosting as affordable as possible for everybody, right? So to keep costs down, we pay for data transfer, and if the booster's in place, there's only the transfer from the server to the booster, not from the server to the clients. So it's a way for us to make things as affordable as possible for you guys. But there is actually some good news on that front, is that we have work going on in 2025 to make it so that having a booster does not dictate what our costs are in hosting. We're going to leverage things like Amazon S3 buckets for FileWave servers to make it so that that's not a factor. So then once we have that in place, really the main reason is just protecting the FileWave server, um, and to funnel the packages through a single point or multiple single points to protect an office. We probably will always recommend boosters. And for on-prem, it's sort of the same thing. Protect your server, maybe protect your internet pipe. Um, so it's the same idea. Boosters are really good for Mac and Windows clients, and that's it. Nothing else uses boosters. So if you don't have Mac or Windows, then you do not care about boosters, even if you're hosted. If you only have iPads, no booster. But if you have Apple devices, think about an Apple caching server. If you don't have one, you should set one up. If you have a physical location that has devices in person. Um, because an Apple caching server will protect your network and your internet bandwidth. Um, you guys both know what a Apple caching server is, right?
Yes. We just don't use it because the majority of our uh, fleet is remote and in too many different locales.
Okay, that can make sense. So for an Apple caching server, I say it's free, but you have to put a physical piece of Apple hardware in place. So it's the cost of an Apple device, and it can be an old one, but it's just turning on sharing in system preferences, and there's a Apple caching or a caching option. And it's really kind of neat. If I turned it on for my home network, um, it checks in with Apple and says, hey, for this public IP address I'm coming from, tell the other Apple devices to come through me for things instead of going directly to Apple. And you can configure it to account for multiple subnets. You could account for it. You could have multiple caching servers and have them help together, help your network. It's super helpful, but only if you have a physical location that has devices in person, because otherwise there's no benefit to an Apple caching server that I'm aware of. ICCB typing. Does it dramatically increase the speed of the update process like macOS updates? 100%. So let's say you had even 50 macOS systems, and you're going to get an update for Sequoia that's like, let's say it's 1 gig in size. Take 1 gig and multiply that by the number of systems. And that's how much data each of those Mac OS machines that's on campus is going to be pulling. So think about iPads that might be on campus or Apple TVs that might be on campus. Apple Caching Server 100% helps for that. The off-campus ones, so let's say I'm on campus today. I'll hit your caching server. I go home, I will not hit your caching server because I'm home on my home internet. If I'm VPN'd in, you'd probably want your caching server to not really look at your VPN subnet because you don't really want to pull that data over the VPN tunnel. There's no reason for it. But Apple Caching Server is 100% free, and it's in except for the hardware, which can be a big cost. But I'll go into my preferences, and I will show you that in sharing there is content caching. You can see I actually have this on probably from a thing I did in the past. So this by itself, with all content, um, and if I go to options, I can say how much of my disk on this Apple Studio is used for caching. And it's pretty simple. If I hold the option key down, I can get to advanced options. So if I do nothing, I just turn on content caching, I do all content, I hit options, I set aside an amount of disk. My Apple Studio listens on my network and caches anything. So let's say I had 50 iPads here. That would be cool. But when the first one asks for an update, it's actually cached on the caching server. And when the other 49 go to update, they will get that same update from my Apple Studio instead of from Apple. If you want to get to advanced options, let's say you're setting up for multiple subnets, you want it to behave differently, you hold the option key down and you can see advanced options. Now, aside from the size, I can define like who I'm caching content, right? I want to make it so that the devices are on the same local networks. So that means like my Los Angeles office, they're going to cache in Los Angeles for each other. Or I'll use the example of a school campus. I have a subnet for the student union. Everything in the student union subnet will cache for each other. Everything that's in the physics building will cache for each other. But a physics building device will not, like this caching server, if it's in the physics building, will not cache for the student union. Yeah, yeah. Um, you can get a little fancier and you can define like how it caches. Um, I could keep it simple and say everybody that's coming out of my public IP address. So it's coming out of the school's public IP address. This caching server is the caching server. Um, if I did this, I'd want to put the Apple Studio that I'm using somewhere in my network that I'm okay that traffic from all over my LAN is going to be going to it. I'm going to want to give it a really fast network connection, right? Um, so that it's not a bottleneck and it's not hurting like the network of the physics building because I put it there. So you can get really creative with how you do this, and you can even have caching like parents and children. But in the simplest form, you can just turn it on and do nothing else, and then you could watch traffic on your network. Um, but holding down Option and hitting Advanced Options, you can do a lot of fancy things with this. So, and it's really like a dumb system in that you turn it on and that's all you do. You don't have to manage it. Um, if this was dedicated to being a caching server, I'd probably want to give it a lot of disk space. Like, why not? It's just sitting here, and its purpose in life is being a caching server. So I would give it as much space as I want, um, or as much space as is possible. Um, and think about devices like if you have a Mac sitting there that is like, let's say you have a cafeteria and there's a Mac that's showing like a message board. It's just showing the menu every day. It does nothing else. It's a very expensive message board by having, let's say, a Mac Mini tucked in a closet doing nothing but the message board. This could be another purpose for it, for that building. If you wanted it to be the caching server for more than that building, then you'd want to think about what network connection it was patched into. If you have fiber on campus, that it leads to a fiber connection that then gets it everywhere, and think about the impact of that. But super, super helpful. And even if you have a FileWave booster, because you have Macs, the Apple caching server and the FileWave booster cache different things. FileWave's booster is about caching file sets. Apple's caching is about caching OS updates, and I believe it also does VPP software as well. Like basically anything Apple-y is cached. So, and yeah, you should definitely experiment with that. It is an easy thing to experiment with. And then if you have access to like your network traffic stuff, or if you have maybe a networking team or person that you can ask like a before and after you turn it on, like say, hey, we want to do this, it'll help with our internet bandwidth. Maybe you could get a good measurement of the last 30 days for different network segments and then see what the after is. And if you see a big improvement, then you'll be able to say that it's totally worth having this caching server because it reduces our bandwidth consumption. Maybe it could save money if you're using a lot of bandwidth for Apple updates and you could have less internet bandwidth that you're paying for. You could really see. But if you did have a FileWave booster, I just wanted to talk about that. FileWave boosters have settings. So in FileWave admin, I think right now my lab doesn't have boosters. Yeah, I don't have boosters. But here you would see your boosters because my lab goes through a few cycles of having them, then not having them, then having them again. You would see them here, and you can get to the preferences for them here in boosters. They have settings. So, boosters have like a name. They have a password to change their settings, which is a lot like the client password. Um, but they have a setting that's really important, this maximum client connections. By default, um, you might see, if you went to settings on a booster when you go to set one up, you might see that it says 101. There was a bug in the past that could make it be 101. That was never an intended amount of connections. You might see that it says 400, which if it's a Windows or Mac OS booster, that is the maximum you can set it to. And I would think in general, if you set up a booster, you probably want it at the max. A Debian booster can do 2,000 connections. And I'm more certain than ever that our Windows and Mac boosters could handle more now because of some changes to a library that we use. So you may see that we announced that Windows and Mac boosters can support 2000, but that's something I gotta look at more. But you can change the debug level. Debug level, 10 is like the normal level of logging. If you ever see that this is set to like 99 or 101 or something like that, definitely it should normally be at 10, because if it's set super high, then it's logging a lot, which can slow it down as far as performance. Definitely when you have a support ticket open, turn up logging. But normally you don't want logging high. Deleting unused file sets. I can't think of a scenario where this should be unchecked. All this does is when you delete a file set in FileWave admin, it deletes it from the booster. If you do not have this checked, your booster will grow and grow and grow until it runs out of disk space. I do not know what in the past led us to add this option, but it can only lead you to trouble. So always have it checked. Validation interval is every 24 hours by default. It goes through and double checks that all the file sets are intact and good and re-downloads anything that appears corrupt or changed. So that is fine the way it is. Client download speed limit. Almost nobody uses this. This is if you had a really you had a location that has a really small internet pipe. You have your clients that go to the booster to save on network connectivity. So they're going to the booster, but the booster itself could saturate your network. So you can limit how much bandwidth the booster can do. So it's just a way to protect your network. Almost nobody uses this option because just having the booster is usually enough to protect your network because the clients all go through the booster. This SSL one, this is gone. I gotta just update the screenshot, but we only do the secure port. Even though 2013 is there, we're doing the secure port. And same thing here. Down here, there's an IP address for a FileWave server, which is not good practice. Really, DNS names should always be used. I leave this here so I have like something to talk about. It should really be a DNS name. So it should say like filewave.mycompany.com or something. And then it has 20,015, which is the insecure port, but we automatically go to the secure port. So that is enough on that. There's good articles about setting up boosters. In fact, in YouTube, on our YouTube channel, there is a video about booster best practices that could be good. And maybe I'll try to add a little button to get to that video when I post this video. Okay. For organization, I already talked about organization. Do you clean up old file sets? So I don't have to really dig into that so much, but you can see this screenshot was when my lab was very messy. And very messy is very difficult to clean up over time. It just gets crazier and crazier and you don't know why you have things in here. So really think about why you have things in there. For instance, if you work with professional services, we can do, like I know, Sean, you work with Emma, right? So you could totally, spend some time with her getting advice on how to clean it up, if there's anything to clean up. And then I think this is actually the last slide. Yep, it is the last slide. So custom fields. The last, but kind of important. Do you guys both use custom fields? So Sean does. CBD, I'm not sure is a fine answer because then I can talk about it. So, okay. So in FileWave, when I look at a device, right, like Andrew's machine here, Andrew's device has a whole lot of information, right, that is collected through inventory, right? You'll get things like what OS is on the machine, right? That's just a built-in field. But there could be other things that you want to collect that's not built into FileWave. So this is a Windows system, and BitLocker status is not a field that is included in FileWave. This is actually a custom field. And I know that his machine is fully decrypted. I might care about BitLocker, and even though FileWave doesn't have this as a field, I can actually make this be a field. And I will show you where you define custom fields. So you just go here to Assistance, and you edit the custom field definitions. And you can see these are all the ones that I have. On your server, if you go to the same place, this may be empty. It starts off empty when you're a brand new server. But I have a field here like asset tag. Now, my example of a custom field was showing BitLocker, which makes you think, oh, there's a script or something. And there was for that. but you can also make fields that are just for storing data. Like almost everybody makes asset tags, at least well, a lot of people make asset tags. So whether it's a company or a school, you may have one of those stickers that you put on the device with a number that you can't rip off the sticker or anything, and you want somewhere to put that asset tag in FileWave so you have it. So you can make a field called asset tag, and this is just a string. It's assigned to all devices, meaning I can put a value in it for all devices. It's going to be a string. It can be a number. It can be a true false. It can be a date and time. Think about like a lease. If I have a lease end date field, I want that to be a date. But something like an asset tag, I want that to be a string so I can just put something in there. I can have default values for it. And I'll show you, like, if I right click on Andrew's device, I can edit custom field values. And here's asset tag. Let's say that's the asset tag on his device. So I've set that, I hit save. So now that field is set. And if I go here, I can see asset tag is ABC123. If I make a query, I can make a query that's all my machines with all their asset tag numbers. Because I can import data into FileWave, I could do a bulk import. If I have the asset tags in like a student information system or something else, I could import that list in here. And so I can populate asset tag. So that's just, a field that you want to say what it is. If I think about schools, there's teacher versus student devices, or there's you could have a field called role. And I might have made one called role. Yeah, user role. So I made one where it's student, staff, or admin. And you can pick from a dropdown. You don't type it because when you type, you can make typos. You pick from a dropdown when you go to edit the field. I can use this to assign things. So if a device is marked as student, maybe it gets a particular proxy configuration. Whereas if it's staff or admin, maybe it's allowed to do more things or gets different applications. So you can leverage this for assigning content or file sets. You can also use it for scripts like that BitLocker status. BitLocker status is a is a batch script. I was going to say PowerShell is a batch script, and it just echoes out the status of BitLocker on a Windows system. So you can use scripts on Mac OS or Windows because those are the two platforms where you can run things. And so the field can collect information. So on Mac or Windows, anything you can do through a script, you could report on. So like if you want Windows systems to see if Windows installer is like broken, we have a script that does that. If I want to check the version of PowerShell, I have the version that does that. If I want to check if the Lightspeed agent is installed here on Windows, I have a script that does that. But on the Mac side, because Lightspeed is a proxy that's Mac and Windows, I have a custom field that can check it on the Mac as well. And the one field will show my values for my Mac and my Windows systems. So it's a really great way to use a script or to manually edit, or we have like an API, so another system could talk to FileWave and update it, read it, or write it. We can do things like this Photoshop field is a Boolean. So this would be an example where if I set this to true, maybe they get Photoshop installed on their device. If I set it to false, maybe they get it removed. It can be a good way to assign software to a device by just using that field. So hopefully that makes sense. And if I want to make a new one, I just click the little plus. I'll give it a name, my example field. Right? And then I'm going to say, so if I say administrator, and there's an article in the knowledge base that talks about the different kinds of fields. If I say administrator, it is a field where I'm going to type something. So if I make it an integer, I could use a default value. It shows a 0, but it's really like a true false. Think about 1 is true and 0 is false. If it's client script, well, then I get the scripting bits. And let's see, does the data from creating these fields typically reside in specific? So the data from the field, so let's say I'll remove this field. So my BitLocker status. The script itself is transmitted, encrypted, and sits within the FileWave client. And then when it runs, the result is stored in a file, but it's transmitted. No, it's not stored in a file. The result is transmitted to the server, and the server is where it is stored. So, uh, so I guess if I made a script that did this, if I did this, I put the word Bob into a file in private var Bob, then technically this script would be writing to Bob. I could make it put anything I want in that file. So you can make it do that. But the intent of the script is that once you make it, it would be available in FileWave server. So it would be stored here, the output of the script. There were some original custom fields. Originally we had, I think it was 10 built-in custom fields that they were stored in a file on the client, and they were meant to be edited on the client. Those are legacy, and people don't really use those anymore. But these custom fields people use, and it's stored on the server. So even if your computer gets wiped out, the fields would still have the value. And somebody couldn't really mess with a file on the client and make the results be something different than what they were when the script ran. Does that kind of answer what it is and how you use it? Yeah, custom fields are very powerful. If you have Mac or Windows systems, you can do a lot. Even if you have iPads, which cannot do scripting, you can use the fields for things like asset tag numbers, for role assignment, like whether it's a student or teacher, staff member, anything like that. These fields are pretty helpful. Yep, tagging. Yep. So, and you can do imports into FileWave, so you can bulk import. If you, let's say you had a spreadsheet with all this information and it had like the serial number of the device and these values that you wanted to bring in, you could do a bulk import and import the data into FileWave and then get rid of that spreadsheet because it's all in FileWave. And because you can export from FileWave, if you needed to reuse that information in some way, you could always export it and give somebody a file. Including that email thing I showed you where the scheduled reports could email a copy of that data every week or month or whatever in scheduled reports. So, which I'll probably get rid of this so I don't actually email myself. So that is custom fields. So I'm glad that that was newish to you because it is a way that you can use FileWave pretty efficiently. The reason that I talked about in this kind of best practices is when you think about a custom field, the two things to be careful of if you're writing a script. Will that script be stuck in a loop, right? You don't want a script that won't get out, it'll get stuck in some kind of loop and be running forever. That would be not great. You don't want a script that's going to collect so much data and stuff it into that field. So I wouldn't want to make a custom field that takes a log file and puts the whole contents of that log file into the custom field. It might at first sound like a good idea, but if that log file was a gig in size, then think about that custom field, every time it updates, which is every day plus every startup. So every startup plus every day, it would be transmitting 1 gig of data if that log file grew to be a gig in size. That would be terrible. So whenever you're making scripts, think about like what you're collecting, how much is it really useful? I might look at a log file and just take the last 10 lines of the log file, and I'm always transmitting just 10 lines of text. And that might be useful. Or I might look for errors within the log and then transmit the last 10 error lines. So that you want to just think about that, because you could cause performance issues if you made a custom field that was extremely large about how much data it reported in. So, but FileWave is great in that it's so flexible, but it's also you risk hurting yourself because it's so flexible. So that is uh that is this chat. Unless you had anything else best practice related, or if you have anything else like at all, file wavy to ask, I can do that. I could stop recording if it's not like best practice related and then save this for YouTube.
So, in regards to the custom fields, is there, I know that in some people, for example, have recommended that the scripts be simple and not too complex, at least in terms of when being used for custom field.
It's
Is
oh, sorry, what's the rest of your
oh,
email?
yeah, basically, is there any type of guidance in terms of how many custom fields is too many, or the complexity? How much? What's the dividing line between simple and too complex for
So
a script
yeah, so it's
within?
not complexity is not well, there is a downside to complexity. Complexity means that you could introduce, problems like an infinite loop where it never exits. But you could have like I wouldn't have a script that's it's hard because there are scenarios where I could have a pretty complex script. Like when Tony and we worked together at Time Warner years ago, we had this one script because this concept existed in a product that doesn't exist anymore called LandRev. Um, we had Tony called it like the Uber script. It would check this long list of things, and it was pretty complex. Like it would check like 30 things if I remember correctly. Um, each one of the checks by itself was fairly simple, but if you add it together, it got to be a pretty lengthy script. Because the whole idea was if it reported back okay, then it passed all of the checks. If it reported back a problem, it would say what the problem was. Um, but that was an okay script for us because we made absolutely sure we had no infinite loops. We also made sure that all the checks we were doing were not they weren't going to make the machine very, very busy. Like, imagine that you make a script that actually searches the whole drive for a file. Well, that could be pretty busy. If I think about like a Mac, there's two ways that I might look for a file, right? I might walk through every directory looking for the file. That would be pretty busy for the disk. And now every time it runs, it's going to do this. It's going to walk through the whole thing. Or I could leverage Spotlight, because, the Spotlight database knows where pretty much everything is. I could actually use MD-find to ask Spotlight where the file is or something about the file. And then that would be less impactful. So it's really about thinking about if all your scripts in your list, when you think about them together, like, do you feel like they're, doing too much? And it's more of a feeling. There's not really a way to measure it. Although it would be nice. It would be nice if we could expose somewhere, total runtime of the custom fields. Like, if that was like a metric that we showed for clients, like you could see this client took, 2 seconds to run all the custom fields. Great. But if it says it took like 20 minutes to run the custom fields, maybe that's not so great. Um, but there's other things like how busy it makes the disk. So it's a very complex answer and question. So sadly,
I
it's
mean,
it's not an easy
yeah, I
one.
mean, one of the things is about if the custom fields are being too busy, that's going to affect client
Yep.
performance as well.
Yeah, but
Because how often are the custom fields, um,
oh, they get run.
how,
They get run
yeah,
at
how
boot
often they're
time
in?
and every 24 hours.
Gotcha.
So it's not so often, but if you think about it, if you made a really bad custom field, like one that just made the machine super busy by whatever it asked, um, let's say it made it super busy for 5 minutes, you would hear reports from users randomly that, at 3 o'clock my machine was busy for 5 minutes. And then another user would say at 1 o'clock my machine was busy for 5 minutes. And you would have to piece together like, huh, there's some common thing that's happening. Now, if you were to look at the FileWave client logs, you would see, oh, well, that was running the custom fields at that particular time. And then you'd probably piece it together pretty quick once you did that, but it would be a little difficult. Tony and I actually experienced something like this. So there was a WMI call, I think it was. There was something that he was checking on Windows machines that would cause the floppy drive to, that noise from floppy drives where the light would turn on and go like, eh, eh. Um, it would do that from this WMI call that had nothing to do with reading the floppy drive. And you can tell this is an old story because it had a floppy drive. Um, and we would just hear this thing about like, I don't know why, but different machines' floppy drives are turning on, for a moment. And we figured out it was one of our scripts that was running. And so that will happen. So I would say, for any script, you probably want to enable it just for certain machines at first, like so you could watch what it does, and maybe see that there's like an impact. And the way you could do that is you can see this BitLocker status is assigned to all devices. This is a copy. It's the same field. Let's say I was designing this and I don't want it to be assigned to all devices. So this guy, which is, I'm developing this new field. It's just in testing. I do not want it assigned to all devices. So now this associations becomes relevant. So I'm going to edit the associations, and you can see this one is selectable because all my other ones are actually set to be assigned to everybody, so you can't really change it here. But this one I could assign it. So I could pick a machine or two, assign the field, hit save, and now Andrew's machine is the only one with this version of the field assigned. And so then I can do some checking, some testing. I used to typically, the first machine I would assign fields to was my own machine because I knew like I would notice if I was getting impacted and I could access the logs quick. So, and I saw CB has a question. Best way to make use of and just generally reference FileWave log files, specifically as a way to view a log in real time or follow the log. So that is a good question. So there's two parts to this. So one is, where is the log? And I can tell you that there is an article. So if you type log file, you'll see log file locations will be like the first thing that comes up. So this article lists where all the logs should be for all the parts of FileWave. So for instance, if I'm going to look on a FileWave client at a particular file set and what happened. So I can see the file set ID is used. So in FileWave, this empty file set is 287. And this firewall settings is 463. And this one's 467. So there will be a folder to look at that has that number. And inside of that folder, there will be a log file for each of the scripts that were run in the file set. So you could use this to know where to find it. That's more of manual, right? But I know you said following the log files. So there's not like an easy way to tail the logs remotely, which would be super nice. But I think we're going to get there. There's some changes coming in January to client monitor. So you may use client monitor sometimes. So let me pick my, I think I can probably, yes. Okay, good. So this is a virtual machine that's here and I'm using client monitor. Client monitor has this client log button. I can click it and I can have the log file. So this is the log file that was fetched from that machine. So The good thing is I can get the client log at any given time, but it's not remotely watching it, it's a copy. Um, I can ask it to do a verify, which is that once a day thing that it does to run the custom fields, gather inventory. I can also remotely change the preferences. If I remember, well, if I remember this, no, I may have made it gobbledygook. But if you know the password, you can change the client preferences remotely. In 16, this is getting overhauled. It's going to not require the IP address. It'll leverage the NATS connection that the client has to get there. You won't have to put a client address in, and you won't need a password for this preferences, because the thought is that you're authenticated to the admin, and if you have the permissions to modify clients, then that is what should grant you permission to this preferences button. So that password I showed you on the client custom client builder, that password goes away with version 16. Um, but you can get the client log here. And in the new version of this, aside from not needing the IP anymore, you can also fetch various logs directly from Client Monitor. And the Client Monitor will look the same both in Central and anywhere at the web admin. So it'll be one interface, and we'll be able to get multiple of the log files, but it still won't do an active like tail of the log. I think that could be a good follow-up thing to add to the new client monitor, um, because I could totally see that you just want to watch the log remotely. Any other questions? I see you guys both typing. And you could do that. You can do that on the machine with that client monitor. When you could client log, it kind of fetched it from the machine. If you're at the machine, yeah, you could open it with Notepad, or even locally you could open it with Notepad. It There are other things, like if you're on a Mac, you could use tail to watch the log if you're on the machine. So, but that would only be helpful on the machine itself. And is it so Notepad would be Mac, right? I don't know why I'm blanking sometimes. You know, with WordPad, Notepad, Notepad plus plus is on Windows. Oh yeah, what what Sean just put. So, so on a Mac, what Sean just put would be good because it puts it in debug and it tails the log. Now on Windows, there's not like there is a tail for PowerShell that you can do. And you could accomplish a similar thing in PowerShell, unless maybe Sean knows it on Windows.
I
Ah,
don't know Windows.
so on the Windows side, though, you could with PowerShell tail a file, or there was an app called Beartail that I always used to use. I think Tony still uses it. Um, and Beartail was like a tail for Windows, basically. Sometimes I cheat and I use I'll use like AI to do stuff. So I'll say I want to tail. Yeah, so and that's how you do it, because it'll wait and it'll keep showing the content, so you can keep on doing it. So sometimes I'll just use AI to find the thing because I work so much in different platforms. It's usually a good starting point. Sometimes it gives you the full answer. I could ask it for more detail, but like to set the debug level and then to do it, just like Sean's example. Yeah, if you guys have you guys played with AI stuff at all for scripting in particular? It is super helpful. Um, in fact, I'll show one other thing. Let's see. Here, let me bring over my workspace. So, if you use ChatGPT at all, there is a newish thing. So there's this ChatGPT 4.0 with Canvas. This is like in the paid ChatGPT, but help me make a script that will show the encryption status of BitLocker. All right, you start with like a simple idea, and you'll see that it will change the interface into this, where it's got this like this editor. Oh man, yeah. I see. I'm on the other end where I do know a lot with scripting, but you start to mishmash things in your head after time. Like, oh, I did this thing and I thought it was on Windows, but it was really on Mac OS. And so I'll use it. And sometimes I use it to make like a template as a starting point. But this Canvas thing is really cool because you can edit in here. Here I want, oops, I don't think it finished with that. Here I want to echo the date. Right, like I can put comments in. You can actually ask it to add logs to the script that has some pre-built buttons, and it goes through and it actually edits the script. Like, and you can do things like, let's say when it's all done, let's say I have a problem with this. I don't like this. So I highlight this and I can actually ask ChatGPT about this part of the script. Um, it's really, it's exceptionally cool way to edit a script because you can kind of collaboratively work together. You can put the bits in that you know, and then for things that you don't know how to do, you can ask it. So. Yeah, and oh, so ChatGPT. So this is in any of the ChatGPT Plus. If you have the free one, I don't think it's in there, but the way ChatGPT's been, they've been adding things, so maybe it is in the free. I have the Teams one where they don't train on any of my data. So any kind of corporation like FileWave would not want them to use the data that I create, if assuming I'm doing real things, not to train the AI on it. And that's one of the deals with the paid one, um, is that I have it set not to train on my data. So, but Canvas is very cool and very helpful. And even when you go back to, let's say, I go out and I go back to um, a script that I made before, it looks like a normal chat, but there's a little button here, Open Canvas, and it brings up my script with all of my conversation. It's just a nice way to view the scripts because I'm sure if you've worked on scripts, it's really annoying in the normal chat GPT. It's really annoying because it keeps on spitting out the entire script like over and over, which makes the whole process take a lot longer. And with this, there's just this one copy of the script. So you can just kind of work with it and work at fixing the parts you want to fix. So, and I actually use this for our downloads page for the updates for server, booster, and IVS. I use this to make the three scripts be the same, do things exactly the way I wanted, to build out ideas. It's really good. Um, Obviously, test everything because, you know, at the end of the day, it could make a mistake. So cool. So I just wanted to show that because it is super helpful. Um, and anything else you guys want to talk about related to FileWave, or I could end the recording at least. Okay, thanks, Sean. Thank you for attending, and thanks CB as well. Come back for any of our discords, and